a co-editor. Oh, now we're recording. Hello to those in recording land. So I was the associate editor for the American Journal of Sexuality Education. I'm now on the board of that academic journal, and I founded an organization, a nonprofit organization called Unhushed, and we write sex ed curricula and associated materials and train people on how to use them locally at the state level, at the federal level, and then globally in really fun and interesting ways. And the last 18 months have been, to a large degree, figuring out how to do sex ed online. So, sex education really hadn't been done online until COVID started. There were a couple of university classes, and I was one of, I think, the few people who had taught at that level online. But for the most part, certainly at the K through 12 level, sex education was never done online. And then all of a sudden, along with everybody else in the world, everything had to go online. And so we've done a lot of work in that area. We now are working with IPPF Europe. Our training on how to teach sex ed online has been done in English and in Spanish, and it's been really fun. And let's see, just one more thing, if you'll just give me a moment, because I'm really excited about this thing that happened last month, which is that the World Association of Sexual Health gave Unhushed, which is the organization I founded and run, the Innovation and Excellence in Sexuality Education Award, which is this really big global deal. And I'm really excited about it. So that's what I've been doing, Shireen, in the last 15 years, 20 years. I guess it was 20 years because I had a baby when I was in your class, like a little bitty baby. And now she is a great big 20-year-old human and off doing entirely her own things. So sex education is kind of my deal. And I love talking about sexual orientation and gender identity. The landscape of that conversation has changed so much over the last 15 years since I've been doing sex education. It's been really fun and interesting. And one of the things that I love about sex education is just that capacity to always have new things. And this is an example of a topic where there's always new things to learn, right? We're never in a stagnant place around sexual orientation and gender identity. So I want to start us off with just kind of getting a sense of where y'all are. So I'm going to have a Mentimeter survey come up in just a second. It's entirely anonymous, so there's nothing that's going to pull any of your answers back to you. I hope that you'll feel comfortable answering honestly, just as a kind of a way of talking about what are the ways that we get introduced to sex education, right? This is really my question here. So can y'all see my Mentimeter questions here? Shireen, you're the only one I can see. Can you give me a little nod or a thumbs up? Great. And I'm going to copy and paste the link into the chat box. So you can click on that directly in the chat box, or you can go to menti.com and use the code 41617360. So this question, how old were you the first when you met someone who openly identified under the LGBTQ umbrella? And well, most of us know these things. I'm just going to point out, when I'm looking here, I'm looking at all of you. When I'm looking over here to the side, I'm looking at the Mentimeter. So if I'm looking over here to the side, that's why. Because the way that the degree to which people who identify openly as LGBTQ plus are integrated into our lives has an impact on how we understand and connect to this community. Is it something that that has always been a part of our lives, right? Were we under 5 years old when we met our first person who was openly identifying this way? Or were we in our teenage years? I found lots of people were in their teenage years the first time they met someone who openly identified as LGBTQ plus. And that's really resonating here, right? Is that's a pretty substantial bulk. So down in the right-hand corner, I see that about 30 people have responded. I think we have closer to 50. So I'm just going to give you a second more to go ahead and pop your response in if you would like to. Think about how old you were the first time you met someone who openly identified under the LGBTQ plus umbrella. Um, I was my aunt is queer, and am I muted? Am I muted, anyone? No. Okay, good. My aunt is queer, and even back in the 70s when I was born, identified in that way. And so my mom loves to tell the story of me getting really angry as a like 4-year-old and stomping my foot to demand that my little neighborhood play group of friends, that girls could get married to girls and that we could play that two girls got married. And that's just a very different kind of experience around, how people feel about themselves in the world as, am I queer? Are you queer? Where do we fit together in our lives? And I will try to speak up a little bit as well. All right. So when you think about that person, whoever that person was for you, right? For me, it was my aunt. What kind of relationship did you have with that person? What role was that person in your life? I think that somebody has unmuted. Okay, I think that has fixed it. No, there was somebody who was unmuted, and so there was a feedback loop going on their end. So school friend, I wasn't allowed to be around them. I'm so sorry. That sounds like a really painful thing to have as a primary element of the kind of relationship you had with them. Friend, uncle, family friend, high school classmate. Yeah, somebody in that circle, right? Somebody in that circle of people who are part of your community, who are part of your connections to the larger world. Stranger at school. My ex-boyfriend. Friends from high school, parent of a classmate, godfather. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And when is the first time you received formal education about sexuality, about sexual orientation? So if we think about formal education, this is not the kind of like you're Googling the information yourself, or even, like talking with your family about it. But when in that academic structure was the first time that you received some kind of structured education around sexual orientation? I always love it when people say today. I'm like, congratulations and welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. I can't even tell you how happy that makes me. College being a primary answer here. A little bulk of high school, but college does seem to be a primary time and place when people kind of get their first formal education, which is so interesting because we look at something like, when do you meet someone? Mostly it's before college. If we look at, when people are understanding their own sexual orientation, mostly it's before college. And yet we're waiting until college to such a large degree within our educational system to provide that formal structured education. Okay, let's keep going. How would you characterize the quality of that education, that first round of education that you received? In one word, I think this is a word cloud question. Yeah. Okay. So there's I would say, very substantial range in these answers, right? We're going from tolerance and inclusive and multicultural all the way to confusing and heterosexist and bullshit. So a really wide range, along with some things like decent and basic, clinical, like there's, some more like a little more neutral terms, but we have a full range, although heteronormative is getting the most attention here. I would say that the really high quality words that we're looking for aren't as perhaps as prevalent as the other neutral and negative words, but I'm really glad to see them in here. And I think that this is I think this is fairly common. I think that these kinds of words, I've run this Mentimeter now with quite a number of different groups of people. Most recently with a group of Waldorf educators, and I did it with a group of people who work in the child welfare field in Texas. So I'm getting a pretty interesting like framework for what are the words that tend to come to people's minds. And this is this leans a little more positive than some of the other groups that I've been with. And so I love seeing those more positive words in here and seeing them as existing. All right. When is the first time you received formal education about gender identity? All right, so these ages are a little older, and this holds true with the other times I've run this, is that in general, gender identity tends to be a little older than sexual orientation, which is really interesting because in general, gender identity is something that people have a firmer grasp on at a younger age than sexual orientation. And yet our structured education about it comes later, which is, I think, an interesting dynamic that I haven't quite been able to put my finger on why that's happening yet. Madison, I'm not sure why you're not able to put an answer in. Yeah, try refreshing. Let's see if going to the next slide helps. In one word, how would you characterize the quality of that education, or the first education you received around gender identity? All right, and these words are, on average, coming out a little more positively than the words about sexual orientation. And what I found is that that's primarily connected to it, the recipients being a little bit older when it started. So while they're waiting a little longer in general to do education about gender identity, the quality of that, because we're waiting longer and people are a little more open with college students about, honesty and inclusivity and multiculturalism and intersectionality, that in general, the education about gender identity is better than the education about sexual orientation. But I think it's really about that age, aging everybody up a few years increases the quality. And there's some in here that aren't great, right? Like vague and limited, lackluster. But I love seeing the really good ones. And I love that good and eye-opening and informative are still, are holding in strong as some of the larger words amongst a group. All right. Oh, did I miss one? No, we got that one. Okay. So what is your sexual orientation? And I have a lot of words here. I'm going to go through a few of them just to make sure that we have some common definitions. So if you're not quite sure where you fit in, feel free to hold off for a second on answering if you want to. So these are not in any way all of the words related to sexual orientation. There's just a few of them. So asexual is somebody who doesn't have sexual attractions or doesn't act on those sexual attractions with other people. Bisexual is someone who is attracted to a range of people. Some people define bisexuality as being attracted to two other sexes and genders, or two sexes and genders. But other people identify it as a much bigger, larger umbrella term that talks about being attracted to a range of people. Demi-romantic is somebody who has romantic feelings only after they've become emotionally close to someone. Gay or lesbian, attracted to the same sex or gender. Heterosexual, attracted to another sex or gender. And I don't like to use the word opposite in these terms because there's not really an opposite here, right? There's just something other than yourself. And then other, right? If you don't feel like any of these words apply to you very well. Pansexual is another way to say like I'm attracted to a wide range of people. Queer is a pretty large umbrella term that can mean any of these things. Questioning is somebody who's trying to understand themselves more deeply and what their sexual orientation is. And then scoliosexual is someone who is particularly attracted to people who are more gender fluid or maybe have aspects of both masculinity and femininity as an integrated part of their own gender identity. So, you know, and again, these are not in any way all of the words. I do not want to, you know, but it's a you know, a fairly wide range, I would say more than we often see. And it's interesting to be able to see some of the numbers, right? And some of the percentages. So thank you so much for sharing your sexual orientation with us. You know, it's really interesting and useful to be able to see kind of who's in the room in this generic way without tying it to anybody specific. And what is your gender identity? So similarly, agender is somebody who does not feel connected to the idea of gender. They don't have a gender. Gender expansive is somebody who feels like their gender goes beyond one or even maybe two or three definitions to be a much broader identification with gendered elements of themselves. Gender fluid is someone who moves between genders, maybe you know, over the course of a day, or maybe over the course of a week, maybe over the course of a lifetime. A man is someone who identifies as a man, and they might be someone who was identified as birth as a boy, or they might not be, but that's their identity as man. Somebody who is questioning is trying to understand their gender more deeply. A trans man is somebody who was identified as something other than a man at birth, but identifies as a man now. A trans woman is somebody who's born as something and identified at birth as something other than a woman, but identifies as a woman now. And a woman is somebody who was either born and identified as a girl and now identifies as a woman, or was, you know, born in any other way and currently identifies as a woman. So something that's important to note here is that sometimes a person who is trans identifies, for example, as a trans man, and sometimes somebody who is trans identifies as a man. And all of those things are, you know, perfectly welcome here and important to know about themselves, and then hopefully have a community of people to share with and connect with. All right, so, and I find that this is like really common in almost all of my presentations. Overwhelmingly, the people who respond are women. I don't know why. I don't know why this topic tends to be more interesting to women, but that is overwhelmingly the largest group of people who I see in my talks. Yes, can I repeat how I define gender expansive? Yeah, so gender expansive is somebody who identifies perhaps as more than one gender or more than all the genders, but their gender is large and expansive. And you know, I think I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to talk about this element, because one of the things about defining words is that can reduce their complexity and reduce the effectiveness of them. Now, I've given you some of my definitions. These are not the only definitions out there. And lots of people define themselves in ways that don't necessarily fall into like my definition of the way a thing works. And which is great. When somebody tells me their sexual orientation or their gender identity and they share that with me about themselves, you know, if I'm in the kind of relationship with them where this is an appropriate question, I'll ask, oh, that's really interesting. Like, what does that mean to you? Because somebody telling me like, oh, I'm gay. Great. What is that? Like, what does that mean for you? Like, we have an assumption that we all know what gay means, but lots of people identify as gay in different ways. And so, I think that the most common way to understand this is something like the word bisexual. And somebody might come to me and say, oh, I'm bisexual. And I'm like, great, like, tell me what that means about like who you are and who you want to be in a relationship with and who you're sexually attracted to. And again, only if we have the right kind of relationship for that conversation to be happening in, right? Like there's lots of places and times where that's not an appropriate conversation to have. But like understanding, oh, for some people being bisexual means that, yeah, they really enjoy having sex with lots of people regardless of their genitals, right, or their gender identities. But when it comes to like a romantic connection, they feel like, oh, for romantic connections and relationships, these are the kinds of people who I feel the most strongly about having those with, right? These are the people who I'm romantically attracted to. And so, with all of these words, there's different ways that people enact them and experience them in their own lives. And so I don't want anyone to feel like my definition is, or the definitions that I've given here are the only ones or the only appropriate ones. There's so many. And they should all be, welcomed in a space where we're talking about sexual orientation and gender identity. All right, so my next question here is, have you ever been the only person of your sexual orientation in a room? And the reason that I'm asking this question, it depends on if they're closeted. Yeah, that's definitely a great point, Madison. And the question about people who are closeted or who you don't know what their sexual orientation is, yes, is a relevant question for sure. Some people nevertheless know the answer to this question, right? Like I know the answer to this question for me. And because I've been in a room where I know the sexual orientation of everybody at an sufficiently intimate level where I can feel quite confident in nobody being closeted, which is why I have things like probably, or I don't think so on here, because there are some people who are like, oh, like, I don't think so, but I can't know for sure. And the social experience of being, for example, queer in a room of all heterosexual people, if one of those heterosexual people is also queer and closeted, doesn't really impact the experience of the out queer person. In fact, it might make that experience of being out and queer even more difficult, because it might be that the person who's closeted is then having some struggles around identity that makes it harder to be the only queer person in the room. So, knowing what it feels like to be the other around sexual orientation changes your perspective on it. Is this a space where my identity is acknowledged and supported and included? Can always be the case if you're the only person there with that identity. And it's just a little different. And it changes the way that you can possibly feel in a space. I'm going to go ahead and clear the annotations on here. So give me just a second. There we go. Okay. So have you ever been the only person of your gender identity in a room? And, what I have found to some degree, to a large degree, the people who are saying yes to this are often women who have been alone in a room of men. And Shireen, I see you nodding your head. Is that what you were thinking about when you were answering this question? Yeah. And it's interesting. Like that's not everybody's experience, right? There are definitely, men who've been alone in a group of women and people who are trans and queer and non-binary in all kinds of ways that have been in rooms where, they are the only one. But this dynamic is something that we pay attention to and that is thought about. If you're the only one in a room with an identity, it's a different kind of awareness of your space and the potential power dynamics within that space. All right, so this was our kind of I think that's my last slide. Yeah. So thank you for kind of going on that little introductory journey with me. It's helpful for me to have a sense of who's in the room, what's some of the background and the perspectives that we're bringing to this conversation. Thanks. I really love that series of questions. I find it very enlightening. Does anybody have any questions now? I just wanted to I've been talking for 30 minutes and I want to be sure and leave space if anybody has anything they'd like to add or to share about the experience of going through those questions or questions for me. Yeah, go ahead. Batul?
I was just really curious about the people who answered no in the last question about being the only person of their gender identity. Not in a judgmental way or anything. It's just, it's very surprising to me that would happen. I can't fathom a situation like that from my own experiences and my own walk of life. So it's just that really took me by surprise.
Yeah, that there would be people whose personal experiences were such that they had never been the only person of their gender in a room. Yeah, it's a different kind of experience, right? And it's useful to be aware that some people have that. And for the people who have that, to think about oh, other people don't have this.
Yeah, and as I was questioning you on that, I realized that, there are a lot of societies all around the world that are very segregated. So that also explains that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so Brian is saying most of my friends share my identity and we're always in the same room. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is so common, right? So often when children are little, they become friends with people who look like them and sound like them and are interested in the same things with them. And then they spend their time with those people, and then that specific group might evolve, but effectively they spend their time with them kind of, over the rest of their lifetime. And, at some point, if once you get into working life, that has the potential to change those dynamics, particularly depending on whether or not the job that you go into is one that's one of the more gender segregated ones. And if you are if you are in one that is more gender segregated with your gender or with another gender is relevant there. Definitely, Herb, definitely safety in numbers. And then Morgan is saying, when I was in Afghanistan, the women could not be in the same room with other men, only their husbands or fathers, if not married. Yeah. And I think that global, division between sexes and genders is one of the really important things to have a conversation about and think about. Yeah, Shireen.
I have white American friends, a couple who are both very close to me. And the man in that couple refuses to join us if there are no men in a particular gathering. And he's super educated. He's one of those liberals, considers himself progressive, but he will say, I don't want to be with just a gaggle of women. So some people choose not to be engaged with people who don't share their gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And then I have friends and people who I know who, they say out of respect to their partner, are never alone with women. I know men who are I'll never be alone with a woman. And I know somebody who took that to such a degree that if he was in an elevator alone and the doors opened and one woman got on, he would get off on that floor to make sure that he was not alone in an elevator for while they changed floors with a woman. And, when you start I like to start asking those questions. I know. Yes, quite a problem, particularly back at like the Pinnacle campus when they were like, 1 million floors high. There's, there are work conflicts that come up, and when you start like trying to dive in and ask like, okay, so you can't be alone in a room with a woman out of respect for your wife, but what if it's a gay woman? Like, would that be okay? Or what if it's a gay man? Like, would that then not be okay? Like, where's the point of friction here? Is it your potential attraction to them or their potential attraction to you? Like, what's the actual problem? And where are we willing to sacrifice professional advancement in order to ensure that this friction does not occur? There are, yes, beauty salons, barbershops, medical spaces, affinity groups, lectures, intentionally gendered, some of them in ways that are inclusive outside of a cisgender heterosexual model, some of them that are not. There's a range of things. My house actually is right next door to an Airbnb, this ridiculously large Airbnb. Y'all, I can't even with how large this Airbnb is. It's like a giant party house, and it drives us nuts. We live in this otherwise very quiet neighborhood, but then we will have like sororities rented out and fraternities rented out, bachelorette parties rented out. And so we get these, groups of like 30, same gender people having parties in the background, the backyard. I did not write that, but I definitely could have. I would be delighted to. When they have their super loud, very profanity-filled music blaring over into our yard, it is infuriating. When I was in high school, I was in a class of all guys, a male teacher and 15 male classmates. Only one of their female was in the class, and one of us missed. It was just the one female. Seriously outnumbered. And it's an interesting dynamic to hold, right? And to think about, like, what does that feel like? What does that mean for us? All right. So, thanks for the link. I'll go have a look at that later. So the thing that I want to do next is have a look through a set of slides about understanding sexual orientation and gender identity. So this first one was really about where are all of you with your search on your own path around sexual orientation and gender identity. And so now we have this set of slides that are, a little bit more like informative, I guess, rather than questions. But I hope you're going to enjoy them. So first, we're talking about gender. And when we think about gender, we think about these two boxes, right? And the kind of cultural, societal perspective is often like, okay, we have a girl box and we have a boy box, and you got to fit into one of the boxes. But this isn't the way anatomy works. It's not the way identity works. There's so many problems with this, like, perspective on gender. And so, nevertheless, this is the way that our language is built. This is the way that our society is built. So while I'm trying to work outside these boxes in our conversation today, we have to acknowledge that the boxes exist, and at least in our cultural perspective. And we don't have a lot of ways to move outside of them. And as we're trying to get out of the boxes, there's some hurdles to that. So if we're running into some of those hurdles today, I just want to say right now, like, I'm aware of the problem with the boxes, and we're going to be trying to move outside of them. And here's kind of our first movement in that. So this is a picture from a book that I co-authored with Catherine Gonzalez, who is a brilliant and beautiful human, and works at Out Youth here in Austin. So this is a book for trans and non-binary teenagers and youth around love, sex, romance, and being you. So all about, sexuality and romance and dating and those kinds of things. The American Psychological Association published it a few years ago. And so what we have here is a picture, right? A globe of the globe, and I can definitely get a little like too deep in the weeds on the way that the globe is represented in 2D space. And so I understand the problems with this layout and I don't love it, but it's the one that we were offered. So I just want to acknowledge the distortion of the visual world here. And these are different groups of people who are not exclusively understood to be, binary in their genders from a global perspective. And I love just like acknowledging that people have lived outside the binary of sex and gender forever. This is not a new concept, but it is new to the West. It is new to the industrialized West in that like very much like Northern European, problematic, heterosexist, cis-centered, modality that so much of our media and our public discourse takes place within. But if we're willing to like step outside of that, there's a lot going on both now and historically. So I just want to really acknowledge that that reality. And really the goal of this was to look at a global historical perspective and to acknowledge that that reality is being present across time and across place. So we're going to do a little bit of history now and think about the many ways that gender has been represented. These are, if, like I said, looking across time and space, lots and lots of examples. We don't have the time to go into like in any way, a really good discussion of that. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm kind of jumping us forward here and now and looking at some of the ways that that gender has been discussed. So here we have our gender Gumby person. This is in a long line of conversations around gender, and it's one of the representations. There are lots of them. And if you go have a look at them, you'll find lots of them. And there's, all kinds of ways that this has happened, all kinds of ways that people have talked about it. This is the way that I talk about it for the most part. And something to just acknowledge is that models are inherently flawed. Every model we will ever see of something like gender or sexual orientation is going to have flaws in it. The goal of models is to make the information accessible to people who don't already have it. So for people who are like, oh, I am deep in the world of gender queerness and thinking through the realities of outside the binary connections to gender, this is not going to be your jam. And acknowledging that there are reasons and points of, having a wide range of ways to talk about something and a wide range of models that meet different people's needs is super useful. Like some of the most innovative work being done around gender right now is really looking at gender as a circle. And I love that perspective as being really different. But what I found is that people who aren't here yet with this kind of framework are typically not yet ready for a circle ideology or model around gender. So what we have here is if we think about gender identity, it's like how we understand ourselves. That's like, okay, I understand myself in this certain way. It is not something we can choose. It's something that might change over time and evolve, but it's not something we can choose to make change or evolve. Gender expression, this is like how we share our gender identity with the rest of the world. This has to do with, you know, the information that our culture, whatever our culture happens to be, takes in and interprets a certain way and then spits back out expectations of us based on that, all of those gender assumptions. And that can be things like hair and makeup and clothes, all kinds of things that we have around gender expression is of that information. Now, gender expression is entirely choice. That being said, people whose gender expression reflects their gender, when it reflects their gender identity, they are happier and healthier, more well-connected, more integrated into their communities, all good things. People can decide to express their gender differently than their identity, but only in ways that ultimately are hard. Some people still choose to do it for a variety of reasons, but it is work to do it that way. And then we have anatomical sex and sex assigned at birth. Now, anatomical sex and sex assigned at birth, we're going to look back to those boxes, and I'm going to say to you, you know, our language is catching up, but it is not there yet. So really, we're looking at when we're looking at anatomical sex, we're looking at things like external genitalia, which is exclusively the way that someone is identified as a girl or a boy at birth. But we're also looking at things like internal anatomy. We're looking at chromosomal makeup. We're looking at hormonal balances. Those don't usually even start to occur until puberty, right? So we don't know what someone's hormonal balances might be like when they're born. So there's all kinds of assumptions we have, and people tend to think like, oh, all of these sets of characteristics go into our girl box, and all of these sets of characteristics go into our boy box. But really, that's not true. The way that our bodies work is a full range of experiences, and we can have a range of each of those things. Hormones, internal and external genitalia, even our chromosomes have a wide variety of ways that they express themselves. It's not just an XY or an XX option in ways that are clearly like delineated into male and female boxes. And then we have sex assigned at birth, which again, the languaging is imperfect, and we've just had Intersex Awareness Day. And so I want to just, you know, raise up the fact that, you know, people are not really classified as intersex at birth. And so I'm still working with like how to make this model better while still making it accessible. All right. We are about to look at some pictures of naked people. I just want to throw that out there. I want to be really upfront that there are some pictures of naked people coming. On this screen, you will see that there is a cartoon person clothed and a cartoon person naked. These are the same things that we're going to be looking at with naked people. They will be the same person clothed, and then they will be naked as a way so that we can talk about gender. Because gender is something that we express to people. It's something that our bodies are part of. And so being able to have these forthright conversations about, you know, what are our expectations when we see people is really important. And I also want to make a quick note that you will see not a lot of racial diversity in these pictures. I'm well aware of that as an issue. It is an ongoing one that we are working on. So the people whose pictures are in here are all people who have volunteered to have their pictures taken naked, and for those pictures to be used in sex ed curriculum around the world forever. And that's a pretty high bar. And I never want anybody to volunteer to have their pictures included in these slideshows who is going to regret it or who feels in any way coerced. So, you know, these are models, they're volunteers. We're trying to get people who are just regular people to come and do this. What I have found is that these photos are really powerful. They're really meaningful. And, you know, we offer money, we do pay our models, but we don't want it to be something where someone is willing to do this for the money, but then they ultimately regret having their pictures taken, because it's not something that we can pull down and pull away. You know, in terms of access to them, they are behind a paywall on our site, but in moments like this, right, anybody can take a screenshot of these models and do whatever they want to with it. So it has to be something where the people are really comfortable acknowledging that they might have nude photos disseminated outside of their control. Okay, here we go. So looking at gender identity, this person fully identifies as a woman, no manness for her. Mostly feminine gender expression. We asked people to come dressed in the clothes that made them the happiest. And so these are clothes where they feel like the most themselves possible. And, you know, she really takes she really loves being feminine. That's just a really big part of her identity. And, but when we get down to anatomical sex, she had a lot of questions. So she's had a double mastectomy, which you can see here. And she chose not to have any reconstruction surgery. She's also had a full hysterectomy. So she doesn't have any of the biological elements in her body that she identifies as being inherently female. So without breasts and without a uterus, her question was, well, maybe I do have some elements of maleness in her body. And again, these are the people's own marks on their lines, right? This is how they chose to represent themselves when we asked them about it. And so then she was like, well, I identify mostly as a woman, but I think that there's some manness in me too. Gender expression for her, she was like, I am very much like a little bit of both. Not a lot of either, but a little bit of both. She had a lot of questions for us. She was like, I've never really thought about any of these elements before. I don't really know what your questions mean. Obviously, I'm a woman. Obviously, if I'm a woman, that means I am feminine. Obviously, if I'm a woman, then I'm all female. And I was assigned female at birth. She was like, there's no nuance in any of these questions for her. So for her, she was very excited, which I think you can see in her face. She was like, yay, take pictures, show people naked bodies. So she was very much excited about it. And then one of the things that when we were asking her to do this, she was like, oh, gender expression. My gender expression is actually a range of masculinity. She's like, some days I'm not really masculine at all, but other days I'm much more masculine. And so I love the way that each of these people were able to take like their own experience of these things and really kind of put them into, you know, their little lines here and think through what it meant to be them. She was like, well, when I'm the happiest, I'm going out on a Saturday night. She was like, can I come get my picture taken on a Saturday night on my way out? And I was like, sure, that's very sweet. And then she was like, great, I'll be there 11:30. And I was like, oh no. Yes, we will stay up until 11:30 when you are on your way out. Oh God. Let's see. So she really wanted to share her shirt. It's a little hard to read, but it says intactivist. And she feels really passionately about circumcision. And so she wanted to make a political statement with her shirt as part of this project. And one of the things that she brought to us, actually, and I think that this is represented in her pictures also, she was like, I love being naked. She was like, you know, I love my body. I love being naked. I love being who I am. I love being a woman. You know, I feel very womanly. And she was like, my mom has a body that is much more like stereotypically what people think of as beautiful. And she was like, my mom hates her body, but I love mine. And, you know, she was just like pondering these things as we were taking her pictures and considering like, what are the elements of that and what does that mean? And for this model, she was like, wow, I don't really feel like much of a woman. I don't really feel like I have much femininity. I don't really feel like I have much anatomical sex. She was like, literally, I was assigned female at birth, but my relationship with my body is not good. And she wanted to have her pictures taken because all of the markings on her body are self-harm scars. And so she was like, I want people to know that the words that they say about a person's body can impact their bodies, right? It's not just even that their hearts hurt, it's that kind of pain impacts their bodies. Yeah, it is. And she just didn't feel connected to her body at all. So literally she was like, yes, I was assigned female at birth, but she didn't feel like there was much anatomically going on with her. It is heartbreaking. And, gender has the possibility to be heartbreaking, and bodies have the possibility of being heartbreaking, and they have the possibility of being life-giving, right? And I think that looking at this model and her experiences and this model and her experiences and kind of sitting with some of that about like, what does it mean to live in a body? But I think it's really useful to think about it and to consider those elements. And then this really beautiful human, shining light, she's a trans woman. And so in her picture on the right, you will see her penis, and she has not at this point started taking any hormones. She was really only out at church. And so she came by our house to get her picture taken on her way home from church. And since these pictures were taken, she is fully out. She has had surgeries. She's like, as soon as COVID is over, I want to come get another picture taken, because I want people to be able to have a sense and see like, what are some of the changes that occur, and what do I look like, and what do I feel like in my body now that I feel connected to my body. So really love this model and love that she's been willing to share some of her journey with us in this way. All right, so this person, this man who identifies with he, him pronouns and is like, yes, like I'm a man, although his gender identity is, not necessarily balanced in that way. He definitely was like excited to be able to talk about these things and think about the ways that society sees him and the way that he sees himself. And so one of the things I love about this model is that his tattoo is of a clock that hung in his grandmother's kitchen. And so that's why he got that tattoo. And so for this person, he was like, I'm a man, but at this time he was also a stay-at-home dad. And he was like, I guess since I'm a stay-at-home dad, I have some womanness in me and some femininity in me. And so like, that was why for him, he made those marks on those lines, was through an acknowledgement and awareness of, being in a role that he typically identified as being a woman's role or a feminine role. All right. So now I've got some stuff on sexual orientation, but before we dive into that, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. And, some of these pictures are really powerful. Thank you, Margaret. I love that you're seeing it in that way. I have found these to be really, this way of looking at gender and sexual orientation to be really particularly powerful. Does anybody have any questions or things they'd like to throw out here before we move on to sexual orientation? Why do you feel left out, Madison? Yeah, the slideshows are not, well, I mean, there was somebody in there who is, so not post-op, yeah. These are people who have volunteered to have their pictures taken. And we are always looking to expand our the pictures that we have. And, frankly, COVID hit. and we're like, well, we kind of have to stop taking the pictures now. I think we're getting ready to start taking them again. It is definitely our goal to have a database of these pictures. Because our curriculum is used globally, it's actually our goal to have a global database, and we're looking for grants to help fund that process. We do want to be sure that we would like every person to see themselves in the slides that we have available. And we would like for that to be true on a global scale. So I'm sorry that you didn't see yourself in these, and we definitely, please know that it is our goal to make sure that you will be able to see yourself in this moment. Yeah, it is imperfect. All right. Oh, I think it is a problem. I think the imperfection is a problem. It's not one that I think, obviously, it doesn't stop me from talking about it and showing it and wanting to do what I can with it. But it is a problem that we are looking to continue to address. Good. I'm glad you're seeing more ways that people are, Morgan. It's so important to see all of the ways that people are. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we're going to start talking through elements of sexual orientation. Now, I did gender first because collectively as a human species, we have been working within the construct of gender forever. Gender is a social construct. It is human made, and it has been around for a very, very long time. Sexual orientation is not that way. Sexual orientation is a much more recent thought phenomenon for humans. It used to be that there was just normal, and then there was things that weren't normal. And what fell into that category of normal, and I use that in big quotation marks, we're going to keep going. Not a great word, but it is like the way that it worked historically. But what that was changed, right? So what people consider to be normal in any given society was different based on the society, but basically there was normal and then there was everything else. So then in the late 1880s in Germany, an obscure legal scholar more or less framed the terminology heterosexual and homosexual, which gave language and words to something beyond normal and not normal. Now, the way that these words were created has actually had a huge linguistic impact on the entire world because it put them on parity. We no longer had normal and abnormal. We had heterosexual and homosexual, which now carry connotations, but the linguistic origins of the words didn't have connotations that inherently represented that one was better than the other, which has had these cascading effects of really good things happening. So then somebody was like, no, there's heterosexual people, there's homosexual people, and then there's bisexual people. And it was assumed that the bisexual people was like this little narrow sliver of people out there in the world. And then we get the Kinsey scale, right, in the 40s and the 50s. And Kinsey was like, no one is a 6 and no one is a 0. Everybody is somewhere else, some flavor of bisexual. Literally everybody is some flavor of bisexual. So Kinsey definitely had his own weirdnesses going on in all kinds of ways, but he was very firm that, in fact, rather than bisexual being this little narrow sliver, it was in fact everybody. So then we get the Klein sexuality grid, which did this really interesting thing of talking about your past, your present, and your ideal way of then breaking out sexual attraction, sexual behavior, sexual fantasies, emotional preference, social preference, lifestyle, which is not my favorite word, and then self-identification. So now we're looking at sexual orientation as being these much broader categories in this much, and over 3 different points in time. And then we have the STORM model, which looked at, so this is basically like, other sex attraction and same sex attraction. So if you're, high on other sex attraction and low on same sex attraction, you fall into this heterosexual little category down here. And then if you're high on, other same sex attraction, you're up here on homosexual. If you're low on both, you're asexual. And if you're high on both, you're bisexual, which is kind of, so anyway, the STORM model then offered like a really interesting way of moving away from, this idea of like, no, it's not that, it's one, it's not that it's one line from one to the other, but in fact, there's, multiple perspectives and then multiple grid lines to consider effectively. So then we get the genderbread person with, still using the Klein grid down here, basically, but looking at taking gender and sexual orientation and putting it onto one big sheet of paper, which was clarifying for a minute, but then ultimately ended up getting more confusing. So Sam broke apart sexual attraction and romantic attraction into 2 different categories here, and brought in some sex assigned at birth, but this is version 4, this is version 1. So you'll see there's a lot of complexity that's been added here over the intervening years between these 2 things. And, that's one of the things that is important to consider when we're looking at, I know Sam always laughs how often people say genderbread man. When we're looking at a model, and I started off by talking about the utility of models, right? And like this is pretty easy. Like we can kind of be like, okay, like I got what's going on here. Somebody who's never thought about anything other than a heterosexual cisgender perspective. And then we look at this one and we're like, oh no, this has actually like, a lot more going on it. And if you're just handing someone this one blank for the first time, they can easily be overwhelmed and be like, this is too much information for me. So thinking through like, what are the right models to, and then other people are like, this is very limiting. This actually doesn't represent me. I don't see myself anywhere on this. And so acknowledging that full range of potential reactions and feelings around sexual orientation models is really important. If you just go to genderbread.org, and someone can probably drop that link in the chat box in a clickable way, it's all there. So here's what I think. Here's the way that I have then gone on to define these things, is that sexual orientation is this additive of identity, attraction, and behavior. And so I represent this in another little person like this. So we have sexual identity, sexual and romantic attraction, and then behavior. So where's my, oh yeah. So I thought I have another one that's like all 3 of them, and I can send that out to folks if y'all are interested in this one also. We have at unhush.org, we have a bunch of free resources and materials. So you're welcome to go and if you get an account, I can't send out the PowerPoint because of all the naked pictures of people. I promised everybody I wouldn't send the files. But I can get the rest of if I take out the pictures of the naked people, I can send that file, Shireen, and maybe you can get that out somehow. Yeah, so this is the way that I think about sexual orientation, is this connection of behavior, attraction, and identity. So, but with my people here, and because we have the same people, actually, what I captured from them was their sexual and romantic attraction patterns. So we didn't get their behavior and we didn't get their identity, we captured their attraction. And so we have the same set of people here. So they will look familiar to you. So she was also very much like, oh, I am heterosexual. Therefore, I'm only attracted to men, masculinity, and male people in all ways, right? She was like, I don't even know what it means to differentiate between this because I am heterosexual. And so this is an example of where someone who's like, someone comes to you and says, I'm heterosexual. Is this what they mean? Because other people have different patterns, you know? So, this person is like, and this is where I was talking about with that bisexuality, right? So this person identifies as being sexually attracted almost exclusively to men and masculinity and male people, but romantically attracted quite evenly. She was, again, like, I don't understand the question. I'm heterosexual, but I'm interested in sex and I'm not interested in a relationship. So this is why she was like, no relationship attraction, no romantic attraction for me. She was like, all the people for all the things. It all sounds lovely. Again, same thing here. In here, there might be a pattern of people who are willing to volunteer to come to my house and let me take naked pictures of them. We acknowledge this is not a full representation of all the people. You know, but I think that this is a good example of, so she also identifies as being heterosexual, but she's like, no, I do have some romantic attraction to women. You know, and so this is being slightly different from the first person on these slides who was like, no, I'm heterosexual, therefore I'm never attracted to women in any kind of way. And I'm just a little bit flipping through this, you know, feel free to stop me or chat me up in the chat box if you want to say anything or talk about any of these pictures in more detail. What is the difference between sexual and romantic attraction? That's a great question, Morgan. And I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a second to kind of chat that out a little bit. So sexual attraction is about that desire to be physical with someone, that sexual activities kinds of things. And romantic attraction is about wanting to be in a relationship with someone, that romantic relational element. Now, for some people, sexual and romantic attraction are the same thing. For other people, they are not. So you know, it might be that for you, your experience of them is identical, but acknowledging that for other people, they are potentially really different because they, you know, either because they are interested in sex with lots of people, but want to be in a relationship with a certain kind of person, or because relationships can be with anybody, but they only want to be sexual with a certain kind of person. You know, there's the potential to be a lot of difference there. Does that help you understand that difference a little bit more closely? Awesome. Okay, and back to our screen. Here we go. So like this person, I thought it was really interesting. You know, he was like, I'm sexually attracted to men, masculinity, and male people, but I'm romantically attracted to men, masculine, and male people, but also femininity. He was like, I actually, when I'm in a relationship with someone, having some feminine elements to that is really great. But if we're just having sex, then I'm not really attracted to that feminine element. You know, and so here's another person who's like, sexually, I'm attracted to everybody in all kinds of ways. And romantically, I'm attracted, you know, very much to women and less so, but still somewhat to men and masculinity and male people. I think this is our last slide. All right, so I have now been talking for an hour and 15 minutes with a few questions from y'all, but not a lot. But I did make sure that we have some time in here. So this is kind of our question period.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm good. I just wanted to say thank you for continuing to do this work and help us stay aware of how things are changing and keeping our minds and our hearts open. Just for everybody else to know, the last time I saw Karen, she came to my son's school to help us work through some issues, and I just really appreciate the work and the perspective that you bring, and thank you for coming to share with us today.
Thanks, Eric. It's been super fun. Yeah, let me start here next with Sarah's question. So how does non-binary fit into these scales? Yeah, let's take a look at them. And I'm going to pull back up our gender scales and have a look at it. So this is, and part of the reason why some people are like, I don't see myself in this, is because they don't feel like this does a sufficient job of it being inclusive of people who are non-binary. Now, there are lots of people who identify as non-binary on this, and the way that they mark it up is by saying my gender identity is down here in the null category. So I don't identify in womanness, I don't identify in manness. If we look at something like I thought I put the gender unicorn in here. Apparently I did not put the gender unicorn in here. So the gender unicorn has a third line. So on that one, it says feminine, or womanness, manness, and non-binariness. And so you can identify then between null and infinity on each of those three elements. I've talked out, kind of the options here with identifying with a null on gender identity here, or potentially like really high on both is also potentially being non-binary, as a way of saying like, I'm actually very masculine and very feminine. And then the possibility of also being able to say I'm very high on non-binariness. It's a bit of a trial and error thing. And, I agree, Sarah, that this is an imperfect representation. And I have not yet found one that I feel like adds clarity, right? So when I have worked with a gender unicorn with people, what I have found is the non-binary line reduces the clarity rather than increases it. And so, I continue to look for other options. I think that having the null here to be like, this is non-existent, but it's not perfect. Let's see. And what have I discovered with asexuality? So I think that there's a lot of people on here who are being labeled with Herb Coleman's name. So I don't know if this is actually Herb asking me this question or not, because I'm not entirely sure what you mean when you're asking, what have I discovered with asexuality? So are you asking like, let me stop sharing my screen. Like, how do people who are asexual come out? Or how do people who are asexual have relationships with others? I'm not entirely sure what that question is.
This is actually Herb. For many of us, and some of my students, it's a new concept of the idea of being asexual. And so I was just curious as to, in terms of, and with Unhushed and some of the other things that you've been doing, one, have you noticed a growing community? Also, how people expressed it, and how have they talked about their experiences of asexuality?
Yeah, it's definitely, I would say, a growing community. And one of the things that I love about the identity around asexuality and the framework around it is that I'm seeing more and more people identify as asexual at times in their lives. And so particularly like with the adolescent populations that I'm working with, I'm hearing people say like, I'm asexual as a way of explaining their lack of interest in a romantic or sexual partner. And it gives them, yes, a community of people. There's a great online community. Some schools have communities of people who identify as asexual, who are asexual. And it allows them to step out of the dating world in really beautiful ways, right? Because it's not just like, I'm not interested in you, I'm not interested in you, I'm not interested in you, but it helps them have language to say, I'm not interested. Like, let's just not do this, shall we? Because this is not a thing that I'm here for. Now, some youth who identify as asexual, that evolves for them. Like I was saying earlier, like identity can evolve. It's not something we can change, but it can evolve. And so some people who identify as asexual, their identity evolves and they might become someone who is demisexual, or they might realize that, as they've gotten older, their identity has changed, their sexuality has changed. And then for other people, it doesn't. And so we don't really need to know what that means for them. But, is this going to change? Like the word, like, is this a phase? I really dislike that framework, because in fact, almost everything is a phase for almost all of us, right? There are a few things that stay static throughout a person's life, but most of us have times and places where we're trying out things and we're really into something, and then maybe we're not into it anymore. And that's just something that changes in who we are as we evolve as people. And so like letting people sit in their current identities and not needing to question how that relates to current or past or future identities is a really important piece, I think, of supporting youth who are asexual, which is the primary place that I've had an interaction with the community of asexual people. Oh, thank you for that unhushed link. Do you feel like there's still placing labels on people who should be creating their own labels? That's a really, like, I don't think we should ever put labels on someone else. Like, labels are something to claim for yourself and never to put on someone else. So you might ask someone else, like, do you have a label, or do you want to share your label? Some people don't want any labels at all. They're like, none of this language works for me. None of it. I don't want any of it. I just want to be me. And, like I know a young person who's like, no, I'm just me. Please just call me by my name. Don't ask me about my sexual orientation. Don't ask me about my gender identity. I am just myself. And so, there's no labels for that, because it's by definition anti-label. So other people are like, oh, this helps me understand myself, right? Now I get myself differently because I have some labels and some words to connect with to explain to me in positive ways who I am. So labels can be great, but they have to be used by individuals rather than put on them by someone else. Yeah, super important. I have a friend who grew up in small town Texas, and so, never knew that never knew that there was anything other than heterosexuality, right? Was very much back like in the world of normal and everything else was other, and normal was only heterosexuality in his little small Texas town. And so, he married his high school sweetheart, and, they moved to New York together, and he was like, oh, I'm really gay, right? So for him, having some language allowed him to then understand himself and, ultimately decide to, end his marriage, although not his friendship or his connection with his now ex-wife, and realize oh no, this is actually who I am. But it was actually having those language, it was having those words that allowed him, yeah, right, Sarah, to see that he existed in the world in a different way. Yeah, and Lee, I think that this conversation about attraction to or engagement in relationships outside of a two-person dynamic is a really interesting one, and something that I've been kind of seeing on the horizon as a growing point of conversation. I think that COVID has kind of taken a break from it because people are really limiting their social exposures. Although the jokes about like I chose the wrong partner to shack up with during COVID at the beginning of the experience were pretty great. And I think that's the wrong copy. Yep. So yeah, but this conversation of like, is my relationship model one that's oriented towards me and one other person, or is my relationship model one that's oriented towards me and multiple people? And if it is multiple people, in what context, right? Are like, is it a closed group? Is it an open group? Is my relationship model one that, you know, any of these models have the potential to work if they're with the right person or the right people? Or is it that really only one of them works for me? And, you know, I think that as we're looking at sexuality and we're kind of getting back to the place where we left off 18 months ago, there's really interesting dynamic conversations going on about trying to find the language to think about relationship structures and models as they relate to something that's as elemental as sexual orientation, you know, and I think it's a little bit different than sexual orientation. And so it needs its own language behind it. And that's still being built and constructed in really fun and interesting ways by people, you know, all over the world. Do I have a go-to resource for staying up to date on current pronouns, definitions, etc.? Yeah, Unhushed actually has a dictionary. So if you go to that Unhushed link that Shireen posted earlier, there is a drop-down menu under free content and dictionaries. And we update that anytime we get something new. So you can always go there. And if you have some language that you think should be included, that you know about, that's not included, you can just shoot us an email and we can update that. We update it all the time. So that's the best place. You know, I couldn't find something like that was constantly being updated, which is why so much of why I started Unhushed. I was like, there's so many things that need to exist. And this dictionary, this online dictionary for language and words around gender and sexual orientation was definitely one of the pieces of that for me. I'm so glad that y'all have enjoyed it. I think we're about at time here.
I think so. And I learned a lot. I'm constantly learning about myself and about other people in the area about gender expression and sexualities, and this added to my knowledge base, and will continue this education for myself and help facilitate for others. Definitely an integral part of peace and conflict studies is to help people understand themselves and be kinder to themselves and to others. So this goes a long way toward that. Thank you so much, everybody who came. Layla is going to tell you real quickly about Karen's next presentation for us, and maybe the one after that as well. We have a Peace in Relationship series that I think we have 6 this year. Thanks everybody for coming. And as Layla has mentioned, once we have added the transcripts to the captioning to the video, it will be posted on our website. So here's to Layla.
Yeah, so Karen will be back with us. I think I misspoke earlier. I flipped dates in my head, but basically she'll be back with us to talk about the conflict of coming out and how that's a very iterative and repetitive process. And that talk's going to be coming up on November 18th. It'll be the same. It'll also be a Thursday from 12 to 1:30 p.m. And we do hope you can join us. And then the last talk in this series for the fall semester is going to take place on December 2nd. And that's going to be with Dr. Dwayna Welch, and she's going to talk to us about communication dynamics, just different strategies for effective communication in intimate relationships, which will be right around the holidays. So hopefully it'll come in useful for all that family time and intimate relationships over the break. So thank you again for your time, everyone. I've dropped the link multiple times in the chat for where you can find the recording and also where you can register for the next one. Here it is one more time, and we hope to see you again. Thanks so much.